Hello, you are listening to the Charles Bonnet Syndrome podcast. My name is Shaimond Foy, and today's special guest is Vicky Hamilton. She's a PhD candidate at Griffith University, Queensland College of Art and Design in Brisbane, Australia. So how you doing today, Vicky?
Oh, hi, Shaimond. Yeah, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for asking. Thanks for taking the time to join us. I know it's going to be a treat. Every guest is a treat, but I appreciate you joining from halfway around the world.
It's great to be here. So nice to be talking to you all the way over in New York, I believe.
Yeah, all the way in New York City, Queens, New York is where I am, one of the five boroughs. Yeah, and I understand you're on the Gold Coast, or you're from that region in Australia.
Yeah, Gold Coast here in sunny Queensland. Beautiful
Wow,
part of the world.
wow, yeah, yeah. I have never been there, but one day I look forward to going there and to all the continents. It's a great big world. It's a beautiful place, I hear.
Oh, very lucky to be studying, doing my research here. I'm right next to the beach. I can get up in the morning, take my books, sit on the beach, and start the day with my research day with the waves in front of me, which is, yeah, it's a good way to study.
Sounds nice. Definitely does. So I understand that you are doing research. Can you talk a little bit about, well, first, if you don't mind, can you tell me when you first found out about Charles Bonnet Syndrome? How'd you find out about the condition?
Yeah, well, I found out about Charles Bonnet Syndrome from researching myself, looking on the internet. I had been having visual hallucinations for quite a long time, a period of years, and just wasn't happy with the explanation that I was getting from my doctors. And I sort of wanted to know more. And luckily, I came across Charles Bonnet Syndrome on the internet. So that's how I found out about it. And it's just such a remarkable syndrome with such an interesting history.
Yeah, well over 200 years. And we actually had an episode where we talked about who Charles Bonnet was. So it really is remarkable. So can you talk a little bit about your visual impairment?
Yeah, well, it's goes back a long time. Back in 2002, uh, I was assaulted. It was a pretty bad assault. I was drugged and attacked by somebody I knew, which left me with a brain injury, and I wasn't treated properly at the time. Unfortunately, the doctors sort of didn't believe me what had happened to me. And, I think that's a long time ago. Things have changed since those days. Uh, at the time, my symptoms were mainly I couldn't move my arm and my neck, and I didn't initially get visual problems, but over a long period of time, it took like a year or two, suddenly I started getting these. Started off with sparkles and doorways would start to become wavy. A lot of palinopsia, when you get the trailing, when you move your hand
Yes.
and you get, yeah, the sort of shapes left behind, things like that. And it took 5 years, but a neurologist did a scan of my brain, an MRA, and she found an aneurysm that was pressing into my optic chiasm, or I never know how to pronounce that quite right, where the optic nerves cross over. So I had a little aneurysm there, and my ophthalmic artery was also coming out of that aneurysm. But so I was seeing neurosurgeons, neurologists, neuro-ophthalmic specialists. They all disagreed with each other, which I think you often find when you see different specialists, they all say different things. You know, were the visual symptoms I was having related to the aneurysm or not? Was there something else going on or not? Um, they said it was polyopsia and palinopsia. They never ever gave me the diagnosis of Charles Bonnet syndrome. They said the aneurysm was inoperable because of where it was. and the shape it was. It had a really wide neck to it. It wasn't huge, it was only 7 millimeters. But over time, the visions I was having just increased and got worse and more bizarre, which, happens. Is I never lost my sight completely, although I'd go out, I'd go out to the shops, and all of a sudden my sight would disappear, and I couldn't see, which is a very frightening experience to have when you're alone and out and about.
Sounds like it. I'm so sorry that happened to you. That sounds very, very horrifying. And then on top of that, you start having the sparkles and then you start having more elaborate hallucinations. So obviously, I know you were going to doctors and you were trying to seek some help from medical professionals, but how did you deal with that? How were you coping with those hallucinations at the time?
Yeah, it's not something that is easy to cope with, and for anybody that's got Charles Bonnet Syndrome or any type of hallucination, how do you cope with something like that when you don't know what it is and your sight's disappearing? If you don't have that support network around you or any information, it's a very confusing and scary place to be. I think particularly, if you're going to the doctors and they can't give you answers, and you're talking to your friends and they're not believing you, because it sounds kind of strange, doesn't it? And your friends, you're saying to them, oh, you know, I just saw this gigantic parcel, a big box with a bow on it over there, and there's nothing there. They're going to look at you like they're going to say, oh, have you been taking drugs? Or if you're older, they're going to think, oh, you're a little bit crazy, and of course, everybody in our community, the Charles Bonnet community, know that that's not true. But for people who don't know about it, then, what are they to think? I think all of this is why I'm so passionate about this research and getting awareness out there. And things like this podcast and all the foundation groups are so important.
Yes, I certainly agree. And being able to share your story and then also the community that we have of people with Charles Bonnet syndrome, researchers and caregivers, and just people just getting knowledge out there really goes a long way. Because if you didn't have someone post some things on the internet when you did your research, you wouldn't have found anything, and I wouldn't have found anything. That's how I first found out about Charles Bonnet. So that is so important. So can you talk a little bit about your research and the things that you're doing now to help with Charles Bonnet?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think the big change came about in my story was with the doctors. I made some images. This is back in 2011. I photoshopped up some images of the visions I was seeing to show the neurosurgeons, look, this is what I'm seeing. Because I found when I described it in words, you'd sort of get this blank stare back. But when I photoshopped images of, buildings all curved over or patterns on people's clothes or people's skin changing colour and actually showed them what the pictures are, then, it suddenly became real for them, or they could suddenly understand what it was, that saying of a picture speaks 1,000 words.
Yeah.
So yeah, what my research is I'm trying to recreate these people's CBS visions and working. It's a co-creative research. So luckily I've got some research participants who are so wonderful. They've given their time towards this research project, and we're sort of working together where they've told me some of their visions, and I've sort of using a little bit of AI, a little bit of programs like Touch Designer or the Adobe Photoshop or Adobe After Effects. I put them all together and recreate what their vision will look like and turn it into a video. And then on my website, I'll post it up there, and then the participant will look at it and say, oh yeah, I like that bit. That's what that part's like. Or they'll say, oh, that part's not quite right. We need to fix that to make it more like what it was. And so we've got this sort of back and forth process going on to get it just right, hopefully. And at the end of it, I have an exhibition of what it's really like to experience this syndrome. So friends and families and the medical community can really experience what it's like to have this syndrome.
How is this research coming along, and when do you expect to possibly have this exhibition?
Oh, the research. Yeah, we're getting there. I'm about, I'd say, 2/3, 3/4 of the way through. Hopefully, the exhibition. Oh, I think I'm aiming towards December. We'll see how we go. And it's hopefully be an exhibition that we'll be able to we'll have in Australia, and this talk of maybe going to Canada, I think Ontario, and because it's digital, it'll be easy to travel around with it. That's always been the aim. There's no point creating all these things if we can't get out there and get everybody to see it or experience it. That's the other important thing for people who have complete vision loss. All of these experiences have a audio component. So like if you go on the website that I have at the moment, cbsvisions.com, on the participant page, if you go listen to it with a screen reader, each video or image is explained, has a voiceover to it as well. So yeah, it's very important that it's completely accessible for people who won't be able to see them, because the idea is to make it so that friends and family can experience it, but it also needs to be a great experience for the CBS community and all different levels of sight loss, vision loss. I'm aiming towards the end of the year, maybe halfway through next year, if all goes well. But research is such a long journey. It really is.
Yeah, and you want to make sure you get the research right, and you have to be patient, and I'm glad you're going through the process. I like the fact that it's going to be digital, and basically it seems like it's going to be digital and virtual also. There's going to be virtual options to see it, or is it virtual only? Or you're still kind of putting it together, how's the final presentation is going to be?
Yeah, definitely aiming to have a website repository of all the information, of all the visions and all the research, so that anybody can access that at any time. So, and that hopefully could be something that could be added to over time as well, so that it just doesn't end when the research ends, which is a nice idea.
Yes.
I also am wanting to have interactive elements. One of the things that I used to see all the time was people's hair color would change, like very fluorescent purples and greens and blues. So I like the idea of, instead of just having screens with these visions playing like very large scale movies, having screens that you can walk up to, and you'd it you would see yourself and the people in them, and the hair would actually change into these fluorescent colors. Or that's just an example off the top of my head, but you could see what it's like in real time happening in front of your eyes.
Yeah, that's amazing. I never actually heard of that, and I've set in on probably over 100 Charles Bonnet Syndrome support groups, and some other kind of sessions or information sessions. And as far as people's hair change, I've heard a whole lot of stuff. But that goes to show that not that I expected to know it all or hear it all. It affects people so many different ways, and it's just really amazing. So just gathering more information and presenting things in these different ways can definitely be helpful. I wonder if it will be a link to some of the things, because a lot of the research that I've read and videos I watch and people I've talked to, it seems to be some commonalities, whether it's the patterns or the colors, or whether it's people in old, like, clothes, or old soldiers, or antique looking, things, ancient. So it'll be interesting to see if there's a way that you can link anything together with your research, or if that's something that comes up.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the primary research questions is asking if there's a relationship between people's thoughts and experiences. And I think that it's a big question to ask. I mean, because all of the science at the moment, they just don't know really how hallucinations work. They don't know how consciousness works. And there's so much brilliant research out there about CBS. It's all very medical. It's all conducted by ophthalmic, neurological, and psychiatric fields. But a lot of understanding consciousness and what goes on through our minds is sort of philosophical about how we make meaning of our worlds. And a lot of what I'm sort of finding is with the participants, a lot of what they're seeing is to do with memories and things that are important from the past. And I think, I mean, for me, there's something to do with inner speech and the wandering and how our perception of the world is reflected back in a way. But it's also, it's a little bit sort of interesting because people, when it comes to hallucinations and the history of hallucinations, it all changed at the beginning of the 19th century, because prior to science stepping in, hallucinations were commonly accepted as communicating with the unknown. And, it's a very Western perspective about, science labeling hallucinations as mechanical disorders. Other cultures and other have very different ideas about that. I think it's that sort of early 19th century scientific idea that severed this connection toward any meaning with a link to an individual, and what's CBS and their thoughts are connected. And I think also, I'm sorry, I'm going on a bit now, but yeah, I think psychiatrists, when they look at hallucinations, if you get one of the criteria of, I think, delusional thinking is getting involved with them. You're getting sort of these big stories attached with a hallucination and having too much meaning in it and seeing too many things in it. If a patient of a psychiatrist was to report a hallucination and they say all of these thoughts and meanings and connections to what they're saying, then the doctor would probably think, oh, that's a bit of a warning sign. And so that, that's part of the stigma of hallucinations. So when you have somebody who's got Charles Bonnet Syndrome, who's got no psychiatric problem, who is seeing things, but they can link something to memory, there's a huge difference between that kind of vision and that kind of connection to who it is that they are as a person and their perception, compared to somebody who may be having a delusional thought. kind of hallucination.
That is actually very interesting because the more that science is advancing in technology, we kind of turn our back against things that are not scientific, and we don't think about, like you said, or how I interpreted what you said, how things were before and more natural ways of doing things. And that is a really interesting point that you're making. I have spoken to people that have Charles Bonnet syndrome, and they've told me that hypnotherapy has helped. And hypnotherapy has been around for a while. And some people have done other things like meditation, yoga, or acupuncture, and it doesn't always have to be a pill that you take that can help. And you can get some relief from some of these natural type things. Maybe there could be a more homeopathic or natural way of doing things. The mind is so important. How you think about something. They even talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, but that's very interesting. And I wonder how Charles Bonnet could have been for people years ago, or even some other conditions where you had hallucinations or something. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's whatever way you can find a feeling of acceptance is uh, the nicest way to be able to cope with this syndrome, because it can be really confronting. And because 2/3 of people have the scary visions, and a third get the happy ones. That's just numbers that come out there. But then, that's a changing, and it's a fluid statistic, because it can start off scary and turn into happy. It's sort of, if you're dealing with something like sight loss, your thoughts, your internal monologue, what's going on in your head, is you're going to be going through a challenging time. So any way that you can find calming and acceptance, and hypnotherapy sounds like a great way to do that. There is a pattern and order to the things that we see in the world, and the way our mind comprehends things. And it's pretty universal. A lot of things like happy is up and sad is down, and we look forwards to the future and we look back in time. You know, there's a, there's an embodied cognition to, like a language towards images and thoughts that are all connected. And there's a sort of, I think, a lot of these images that come up in Charles Bonnet syndromes can have a connection to say you're having, maybe an example. If I could give you an example, Shaimond, it might sort of explain what I'm trying to say. I was at home one day, and feeling all out of sorts and upset. I was no longer working as an architect, and I was having problems communicating what was going on with my friends and the doctors, and no longer driving. So I was just sort of feeling life wasn't going well. I went out my back door, looked up at the sky, and there was this sort of big angry storm cloud. And I sort of went, oh, thunderstorms coming in. So I went back inside my unit where I was living and thought, oh, I better batten down the hatches, close all the windows. But like immediately, just within a second, I sort of went, oh, hang on, it doesn't feel like a storm. I couldn't feel rain in the air at all. And so I looked out the other windows, and the sky was just perfectly clear. Beautiful starry night. I looked back out the back door, sky beautifully clear. So I realised immediately it was a vision, a Charles Bonnet Syndrome vision. So my thoughts at the time, I was feeling really stormy. And the vision, it was a dark, stormy night. And it was very cliche, but it works. It's a very metaphorical, straight up
Yes.
connection. So I think that idea of it's a general linking of speech and space and sight.
Wow. Yeah, that is a really good point. What I'm thinking about now is sometimes you wake up and you don't feel good, or and not necessarily sick, but woke up on the wrong side of the bed, and then one thing happens, and then you trip and fall, or then you're late for work, and then the whole day is bad because maybe you started kind of focusing on the bad, and thinking bad things. Or another thing I thought about is how you can have two people that have a really intense argument in a room, and then a third person can come in. They stop arguing, they maybe not even making eye contact, and a third person can come into the room, and you can feel the tension. You can cut it with a knife even though they're not saying things. So there's basically like an emotional side to things. Because another thing I thought about is that there's a natural and a spiritual side to the world, whether you believe in God or not. It is, and that's not saying that, oh, if you're having Charles Bonnet syndrome, hallucinations, that it's like an evil spirit or something. I'm not saying that at all. But it could even just be the way that, like what we're talking about, the energy and how you're thinking about things and your mindset, and all of these different things can feed into how you are, or even looking, how your face is, how you feel. If you're always tense, if you're tense, you can get wrinkles, or different things like that. So this is interesting. You never know what conversation is going to go, and I think it's always good to be open to hearing some different things. And as I've interviewed me and Eva Potts, who joins me when she's available. I've interviewed now like over a dozen people. We can get some different perspectives, and that's the beauty of reaching out to people in this community that are aware of this conditioning and syndrome, and just to try to just get different perspectives and think outside the box and offer some kind of hope or something.
Yeah, different perspectives are always good. And I think a lot of people, I want people to be able to feel like they can really say what it is that they're seeing and really express what it is, and without feeling like they have to keep it hidden. And I've sort of find that it's a lot easier for somebody to say, oh no, it means nothing, there's no connection, out of fear of what people might think about them. Whereas then, you talk to them for a little bit and then they sort of go, oh, well, actually, yeah, that dog that I'm seeing is actually from my childhood. I didn't want to tell anybody, or, because they might think that I'm a little bit crazy, or, another participant sort of might mention that, these sort of images that are turning up in the kaleidoscope that I've got a link to my child that talks about these cartoons, or, when you mention the personal connection to them, it becomes a little bit more, anytime that it becomes personal, it's a little bit more risky.
I have spoken to people that have Charles Bonnet syndrome, and they told me that numerous people have said that they feel sometimes the hallucination maybe touch them, or they hear a hallucination. But we do know from Dr. Dominic Fitch and all the other leaders that have established what Charles Bonnet syndrome is, and built off the research from Charles Bonnet himself, that it is visual. It's visual. But I'm hearing more and more people say that they're hearing things and everything. So I'm no medical doctor. I will say that. What what my thoughts sometimes is that, because I read Oliver Sacks' book Hallucinations, and it was a fascinating book, and he was saying that hallucinations can come from a lot of things. You can just be anxious and hallucinate. You can have lack of sleep and hallucinate. And so let's just say if you have Charles Bonnet syndrome, and it usually comes when you're relaxing, it usually comes in the middle of the night when you wake up or open your eyes, then you don't sleep well because of that. And then because you don't sleep well, you get more intense hallucinations. And then you get more intense hallucinations, and you go through a period of anxiety where you're not resting. And it just kind of like a slippery slope, and it gets worse and worse. And then maybe, and also, you associate what you see with what you hear a lot of times. So if you see someone and their mouth is moving or they're stomping, you may think you hear a stomp or something, So hopefully I'm making sense and you're able to follow me. But have you heard, based off any of the doctors that you work with or medical professionals or even anybody else about that, have you heard anybody else say that maybe they hear their hallucinations or it's tactile or anything else? I know that's a random question, but it came up, so I wanted to ask you, have you ever heard anybody say that? And do you have any insight into what could be possibly causing that yourself?
Well, no, and for this research, I started off with a survey, and it had screening questions in it. And I think because with Charles Bonnet Syndrome, yeah, I think one of the things that excludes it is if you hear as well, if you're if you're hearing things as well as seeing things. So none of the participants in this research are hearing things. There is a different syndrome that is it musical ear
Yeah, I've heard of
syndrome?
it. I've
That's
heard of it. They have something with the ear that's similar. Yeah, just like they have something like phantom limb for the limbs. Yeah,
yeah.
I've heard of that too.
Yeah, for every sense, there's an associated vision or hallucination, which is just fascinating. That your senses, I think the mind just abhors a vacuum. If there's something that goes missing, the mind needs to fill it in. You know what I mean? There has to be a sense of order within the brain. We can't sort of make sense of a gap or a void within the senses. So if the ear does have, I think that the tinnitus as well, once you have a missing space within any kind of sense, the brain needs to fill it in with something.
Some people are able to adjust better than others. I was in a group of people that had Charles Bonnet syndrome and caregivers, and they were going around the room talking about the hallucinations they were experiencing. So then they got up to this one guy, and he said, "You name it, I've seen it, but it doesn't bother me because I know it's not real." And it just like, I just couldn't believe that. I was like, wow. And then there's someone else that might have seen half of the things he's seen, and they are just tormented. I can't say he's right or somebody else is wrong, but it's just really amazing how someone's able to make that statement and then someone else is not able to. And I said, wow, that was it just really stood out for me.
Yeah, definitely. I think for anybody who wants to understand what it's like to seeing is believing. I think an example that I said to the people in the focus groups I was having is at the university. I used to study out in Brisbane at a different university I was going to. They were remodeling an art museum, and on the second floor they built a walkway. It was approximately 15 minutes long. And it was really high up on the second floor, and they built it with glass. So this glass, beautiful walkway, but nobody would walk over it. It was too scary. So it was engineered, it was safe, but it's that idea of seeing is believing, and like that, being confronted by walking across sort of nothingness is just too scary. It's too scary a thing to do, even though you're safe. You know that it's completely fine. That people just wouldn't. They had to, demolish it and replace it with a normal timber and steel walkway.
Wow.
Yeah, like one of the visions that I had was a big black hole that appeared in a footpath, and I was off to buy milk one day, and when I saw it, I knew it was a vision. I knew it wasn't real. It was beautiful. It had stars in it. It was swirling around. But even though I knew it was a vision, I had to walk around it. I couldn't walk across it because it looks so realistic. It looks so real to me. Yeah, I had to step around and walk around it. So it's sort of, I think that's why I thought of this glass walkway in the museum. It's sort of like for people that don't experience visions think about what it's like to be really high up and be confronted by something that's that scary. And even though you know that it's real or not real, in the case of visions, it's still, there's something going on in your brain that's just not right. There's something sort of scary there. There's something that's challenging.
So the way I'm looking at that is, if you don't have Charles Bonnet syndrome, you can tear the bridge down and build something else up. This is just an analogy. And if you have Charles Bonnet syndrome, you may not be able to tear the bridge down. And it's just like every day it could be something that can torment you or frighten you. And it's just like, how do you come? And what if you have a fear of heights or something like that? And so it's like, it's not easy to just say, try to think this way or do that. Or some people get angry, some caregivers and other people have gotten angry. I've heard stories where they say, it's not there. That's not real. Sometimes when people take that approach, the person that has Charles Bonnet syndrome gets even more mad and makes more tension. So that I definitely thought of that, and that was good. What you just said, that was a nice way of illustrating it. You said that you knew that the hole was not there, but it looked so real that you had to walk around it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I wasn't stepping out.
Yeah, that says a whole lot. So when you first started experiencing these your Charles Bonnet syndrome hallucinations, did you how long before you realized that they weren't real? Like, did you realize right away, like, something's not right, these are not real? Or did you think maybe for a couple days or a couple months, like, there is a ghost in the corner? Like, how did you cope with that, and when did you
No,
realize?
I realized, like, immediately. I think I had migraines as a child, and like from the age of 12 years old with visual aura. So I was sort of used to having some unusual visual effects happening in my sight. So, like with migraines, you get zigzaggy lines and,
Yes.
some tunnel vision and things like that. While my childhood migraines didn't happen very often, I sort of knew what it was like to have something strange go on with my sight. So when sparkles turned up and palinopsia turned up, I sort of went, oh, yeah, I know that that's not right, and it just gradually progressed. So, yeah. Luckily, yeah, I didn't have to go through any doubting. Plus, the other thing was when I was seeing my GP, saying to them, "Look, I've got these strange, symptoms going on." They sent me to a psychiatrist because they didn't believe me. But when I went to the psychiatrist, they sort of said, "Oh, yeah, don't worry, this is not your mind. You're not making it up. This is completely organic." So, which was great. It was probably a really good thing to happen to me because I felt validated at that time.
It's amazing because Charles Bonnet manifests itself as a mental condition because the brain is causing people to see hallucinations, but it is classified as a medical condition because it's because of the visual impairment that's causing it. It's not like schizophrenia or dementia or anything like that. I've heard some people say that maybe we got to kind of bridge the two a little bit, but I want to be careful with what I say because I don't want to lose any credibility or make anybody angry. Because I definitely agree with what the medical research says, that it is a medical condition. But the thing that can get confusing to some people that I've heard, and I even thought about this myself, is that the brain is a part of this, but the brain is a part of everything. Really, in my humble opinion, from a non medical perspective, it really can affect things. They even have like the placebo effect. I talked about that on one episode with someone. I mean, briefly it was brought up, and that's real. Like, some people take something and they think it's gonna heal them, and it heals them because they thought about it.
Yeah,
So it's really, yeah, it's really something else.
placebo is the most effective medication ever tested because it's tested with every single drug trial. ever done. They always have they always know that the placebo works. It's amazing what the mind can do. That I think half trial, don't they? Half the people are being tested and the other half aren't. So with people that are experiencing any kind of psychiatric hallucinations, whether it's schizophrenia or PTSD, or I'm not, I don't have any medical, I can't speak on that with any great knowledge, unfortunately. I have read enough to know that they're very different kind of hallucinations, visions. It's a very different experience for people that are going through that. Very involved, very frightening. Whereas with Charles Bonnet, it's a different type of frightening if you are scared. You're not, yeah. And I don't want to talk too much about that either. It's not my speciality, but it's a completely different experience. And there's so many different types of hallucinations. It's just such a huge field to study. It's really quite fascinating.
Yes, this question came to my mind, and I'm just going to ask it. So it could be for a medical doctor instead, but why do you think some people, like yourself, as soon as you started experiencing these hallucinations, you realize right away it's not real? And I know that could have had something to do with your history and the migraines, but why do you think that's the case for some people? And then for other people, it could be something that's very unlikely. Like there was a podcast we had with a caregiver, and she was talking about her mother, and she said that her mother, she was, I believe, on the phone with her mother, and she said, "There's a cow that just came into my living room, and it's getting the floor all dirty or something." And she was like, pretty much kind of thinking to herself, "Mom, there's no cow in your living room," and not just to single that person out, because I've heard many stories like that. Do you have any kind of like hypothesis, or would you even like to speak on that? I know that's a big, broad question, but because really some people are able to know right away on their own. It could be a very strange hallucination, but they say, you know what? There's no, soldier in my living room. And then there's somebody else that, like, for the first couple of weeks until they find out about Charles Bonnet syndrome, they're like thinking it's a soldier. Or maybe they will think it's a spirit or something like that. Do you want to even discuss that or have any feedback to that question?
Yeah, there'd be so many different factors involved in what somebody's belief systems could be. It could have a lot to do with the context, the space that they're happening in. If it's all the visions are happening within somebody's home in their lounge room, that's a lot different from if you're seeing things when you're going out and about in your daily walk. If you're seeing dogs appear in a park, you're going to be much more likely to sort of, maybe, is that real or is it not real? I don't know. It's because it's the context in which it's taking place in. Whereas if you're sitting in your lounge room and a dog suddenly appears, you sort of go, hang on, that's not supposed to happen because it's completely out of context. The space that it's happening in isn't real. What's your daily life like? What's going on? What sort of memories have you got to, what's the culture that it's taking place in? You sort of mentioned spirituality. Do you believe in ghosts? Because a lot of Charles Bonnet Syndrome visions, when you're having people turn up in your bedroom at night, you know, this makes a lot of sense that that could be a vision of a ghost. Is that historically could get confused with spirits appearing? But if you don't believe in that at all, then you sort of going to sort of immediately sort of go, well, that's not right. I better go get my eyes checked out.
Yes, yes. And I'm thinking like what you said that really stuck with me. Thanks for sharing that story. You said you were walking to get some milk and there was like a hole that appeared in the ground and you knew it was not real, but it looked so real that you had to walk around it. So what I just thought about is what if the whole what if the whole earth just opened up in front of you and there was no way to walk around it or jump across it like that and you knew it was real? I'm wondering like how would you have dealt with that? Because sometimes because I've heard people say that they know it's a hallucination, they know they have Charles Bonnet syndrome, but when it's in the moment, when they wake up and it happens and they're seeing someone right there or next to them or something, they say it's so unreal and so unreal that it is real. It's like very frightening and so I would just that just came to my mind.
Yeah, it is. It is terribly frightening, and it's sort of, it's kind of heartbreaking when you hear of some people that are in situations and isolated and, without, it depends on the support that they can have around them or their, whether they, oh, I don't know, it's sort of, can you give in to them? Can you sort of just let it go? Or how much do you believe in what you're seeing? Or how much do you want to give in to what you're seeing? Or, at that, when I was walking down the street and this big black hole appeared in front of me, I can remember what I was thinking. I was sort of, again, I was upset. It sounds like I walk around upset all the time. I actually don't. Maybe that was something that made the visions appear. I was thinking about a dispute I was having with my telephone provider, and that's when this big black hole appeared, which is, again, I think, a metaphor, or like a sort of a spatial metaphor of the the wanderings of my mind at the time. But it was funny because I kind of felt a bit embarrassed as I was walking off. I had to step off the footpath or sidewalk and walk around it. People were walking down the other side of the street, and I was sort of thought, oh, if they look at me, I'm going to look really funny. I'm going to look strange. So I think that idea of where you are when you're having them, the context of it, like if you're at home and you're surrounded by it, it's very easy. I imagine it would be easier to get lost in the experience as well because there's nobody around to make you feel, to bring you out of it.
Yes,
Do you know
yes,
what I mean?
certainly. It's amazing too because Judith Potts actually had a video. I found she was one of the first people that I found that spoke about Charles Bonnet syndrome from Esme's Umbrella, is her organization. And she was saying that when the COVID lockdown first happened, she said they got flooded with calls. I think they called it a RNIB or whatever they call it in the UK, that answered the phone calls and people were, or maybe her office, but somebody got flooded with calls from people having more hallucinations and their hallucinations becoming worse and more fearful and treacherous. And so they came to the conclusion, her and Dr. Dominic Fitch and other people came to the conclusion that isolation exacerbates the hallucinations. And one thing, when you have a visual impairment, you can be scared to go outside. I've heard people say that either they don't want to be seen as a target, it could be a lot of work to get out, you have to trust somebody else, or even if it's just your guard dog or your cane, but the seeing cane or something. So and when you get older, a lot of your friends die and pass away, and I know people that are young have Charles Bonnet syndrome, but it seems like a majority, based off what I've experienced, are older because that's when your eyes start to fail and you start to develop diseases and all sorts of things like that. So it's already difficult being older sometimes getting out. So when you put all of these things together, being elderly, if you are, or take away the elderly, Just the fact that you have a visual impairment, some people are totally blind, some people lost a significant amount of vision, and it could be difficult to find, okay, yeah, get out. Well, how do I get out so easily? You can find ways, but it takes an adjustment, and then maybe you're fed up, you're tired because of what you're experiencing. So it's definitely, I know that I have to, and many others too, have to show some patience, show some love. And one thing I wanted to say too to anyone that has Charles Bonnet syndrome, that you're not alone, and you definitely can get through this. And I feel that it's really good that there are support groups out there. I was going to ask you about some in Australia if you know of any, but there's definitely some in the UK, some in America, and you can definitely. I commend you first of all for being able to keep getting through day by day and finding ways to do things. And a lot of times you don't realize it, but you're stronger than you realize, just to be able to get through this, which is not easy. And by you sharing your story in a group or with your therapist or whoever you want to share the story with, talking about this, I think that can only be good, because more awareness can bring more attention, and then that can actually, by you sharing something, it could be cathartic, and also it could let people know that, hey, they're not alone. Because I've heard someone, this was someone from Canada, was talking to a friend. He was on the podcast too, someone from Canada. His name was Theo, and he was saying that he was talking to a friend, and then a friend was saying, I've experienced some similar things like that, and I didn't know what was going on. Now I know. So yeah, I just wanted to share that.
Oh, lovely. It's great when out and about and you mention what you're doing and you get that, oh, wow, yeah, I know what you're talking about. I know somebody who's, got some vision loss, and they mentioned that so those little incidental, coincidental meetings, and, sharing the information is such a beautiful thing. But thank you so much for what you're doing, Shaimond. It's just brilliant, this podcast. I think, yeah, it's such a great way to get the information out.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for what you're doing. Any kind of research is good. And to be able to somehow create a way that people can kind of see it or experience this, or be able to share with others what they are experiencing in a visual way, is really good. So I appreciate that. Is there anything else that you would like to say about Charles Bonnet or your research, or anything that you would like the listeners to know?
Oh, I'd just like to say a big thank you to all the participants, everybody who's taken part in my research so far. That's everyone, going from the people who did the initial survey, who shared that, who went on to do the focus group and interviews, and the people who have stuck with it and are doing the co-creative experience right now. It wouldn't be possible without them. If you're in Australia or anyone around the world, they can look at the Charles Bonnet Syndrome Foundation Australia. It's a wonderful website, wonderful group, lots of brilliant information. It's run by Scott Murden. He's a wealth of information here. We're very lucky to have that here in Australia. But I think that's everything from me. But thank you again to you, Shimon. That's brilliant.
Yeah, thank you. And I've had a request from a few people that said, can you have your guests say their email addresses and their websites verbally? I put it in the show notes, but if you don't mind just sharing it verbally.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The research website is CBS Visions, so VISIONS.com. And my email address is vicky.hamilton@griffithuni.edu.au. And that's Vicky with a Y. I'll just say about that website, it's the research website. It has a lot of password protected pages on it. So if you're navigating it and you have a vision impairment, it can be a little bit challenging, because a lot of the pages are password protected due to ethical reasons for the research. But if you're just visiting it as a visitor to have a look, if you go have a browse through the information, there's still a lot to see. And have a listen to it with a screen reader. It's interesting.
I'll definitely share it in the show notes, and thank you for sharing it verbally. And thanks for what you're doing. And I will ask you this too: how are you doing with your vision? Has it improved? Has the aneurysm decreased? And then also, how you doing with Charles Bonnet? Has, because sometimes it does change. It goes away for some people. Can you discuss? Can you briefly share that information?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm so lucky. I really consider myself extremely lucky, blessed. The medical treatment I had was fantastic. They were able to treat the brain aneurysm. A new stent was developed and it was treated back in 2012, so it's a long time ago. The type of stent they used is like a slow, gradual reduction. The brain aneurysm was resolved. It took 2.5 years, and then the visions slowly, like I'd say the complex ones I was getting slowly resolved over the next 3 years after that. They slowly went away. Now I get a bit of palinopsia when I'm tired. When I go swimming in the ocean, in the waves, I get colours. I get some sort of bright fluorescent blue that's not normal. I get sparkly dots. So very mild, no more vivid colours. I kind of miss it. The beautiful things, because, let's remember some of them are beautiful. The people out there that get the really beautiful ones, life can be vivid and intense and incredibly beautiful. And here's hoping that everyone who gets Charles Bonnet Syndrome can see those colours, listen to some good music, and see if that happens.
Wow, yeah, because it is about one third of people actually enjoy their hallucinations. So that's something. And music is good for the body and the soul. It really is so many different types, and it can help soothe you and bring you to a happy place. Or yeah, so thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing that too. Well, I appreciate that. Is there anything you would like to say in closing?
Um, no, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I really enjoy listening to your podcasts. And a big hello to everybody out there in the community. And I hope to meet people in person over there and around the world one day. It'll be very exciting to get out there.
Yeah, because you never know. Things start small and can get real big. So this research you're doing now or some future research, you never know where that can go. And that's one thing that I've said about Charles Bonnet syndrome. I'm a caregiver for someone with Charles Bonnet syndrome, but am a part of the community and doing this podcast and go to meetings and join things. And I say that I met so many wonderful people as a result of this. So that's one benefit, because one thing I realize in life is everything, even when we don't understand it, has a way of working out for your good somehow, some way. When you look back on it, whether it's 1 year, 1 month, 10 years, you can see something about it that will somehow, some way, kind of worked out for your benefit. I know sometimes that can be hard to see, but even if it's as good, even if it's just changing your thinking or make you realize something, or whatever. So I met a lot of great people, and I hope to see some people in person too eventually. But it's really good that for this virtual thing, Zoom, and it's amazing what you can do with a lot of virtual things too.
Yeah, we're lucky that the world has opened up. You know, so lucky to have the participants in this research from England, Canada, America, all over Australia. It wouldn't be possible without the virtual world, and being on this podcast today as well. It's just amazing, isn't it? The world's a small place. Yeah.